In this tutorial, I'm going to go through and I'm going to make a tent, kind of like a vendor stall. So what I have here is my wood masterpieces that we had made in a previous tutorial. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say File, Save As, and then in my same wood folder, I'm just going to call this, I'm going to call it Tent. Keep it very simple and hit Save. That way I'm not going to overwrite my old pieces. Alright, so let's grab our pieces of wood and just kind of move them over to the side. I'm going to take this main wood piece here. Let's kind of drag him over. We'll put him at 100 units. I'm going to right click, clone him as a copy, and then set his X position to negative 100. There we go. I'm looking up here, I see that I'm kind of looking at the back. So let's rotate around so we're kind of looking at the front. There we go. Okay, so here's our two pieces of wood. I moved this guy over. I'm going to go into rotate. I'm going to turn on my angle snap up here. I'm just going to rotate this guy 180 degrees. All right, as we build out of our pieces, we want to make sure we rotate them so that we get, we don't see the texture grain in the same spot. All right, so let's take one of these guys and we're going to clone them. Right click clone as a copy. I'm going to move them back. Let's move them back like 150 units. I'm going to hit Control R to go into orbit. There we go. Maybe I'll just take them back 100 units. Yeah, that's good. And then let's rotate him. I'm going to go another, I'm just going to take him 90 degrees. And then I'm going to right click and say, right click and say clone. One more time and go back into move. I'm going to put this one, he's going to sit at positive 100. And we'll just rotate him again. Rotate, let's rotate him another 90. I'm going to do Alt-Z to zoom in and hit F4 to turn off edge faces because I want to make sure it looks like I'm seeing the same wood grain on this guy, so let's rotate him 90 degrees again. And that looks like a nice offset of our wood grain. Okay, it's a subtle thing. Alright, so let's take these two guys in the back. Alright, and so these are going to be the supports for our tent. And so we'll take these two in the back. We're just going to go into scale. And we're going to switch our pivot to use pivot point center and just scale them down a little bit. We're only scaling them down. You could see down on the side here, I took them down about 75%. Right, that's a subtle difference. The wood grain doesn't look weird between the two, having it scaled down. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this piece here. So let's right click and clone that as a copy. And we'll kind of orbit around. And let's just move him over and go into rotate. Rotate that 90 degrees. And now I'm going to come up here, click on the little plus sign and say restore viewport. I'm going to click on nothing and then hit Control Shift Z. Yeah, now zoom out on everything. Okay, now I can grab my plank and kind of move it up to the top of my posts. Zoom in a little bit here, the middle mouse wheel. Alright, there's my plank. I'm going to right click and say scale. And let's just kind of scale this guy out on just this x-axis here. There we go. So now we kind of got a plank here. Maybe we'll lower him down just a little bit. And then we're going to right click and clone that as a copy. And we'll kind of take that to the back. And I'm just going to come in here, right click, go into rotate, and rotate this thing 180 degrees. And then move it so it's kind of sitting out a little bit. There we go. That's looking good. Now, let's take this guy. I'm going to right click once more, say clone as a copy. And I'm going to, oops, cancel that. I'm just going to come up here and select rotate. And then I can rotate this guy over. And we're going to rotate him up. And we're going to move this down so that this piece is kind of sitting. Kind of want to have, he's going to poke out a little bit in the back. And I'm going to rotate it so it's kind of sitting underneath this other wooden beam. So maybe I'll turn off my angle snap for this. And then just kind of move it so it's kind of sitting underneath those two. There we go. So now I'm going to right click on this guy and switch to scale. But what I'm going to do is actually I need to change my reference coordinate system from view to local. And that allows me to kind of scale that in. There we go. I'm going to move him up a little bit. And now one more time, I'm just going to right click. You know what? I think what I want to do, looking at it, I want to move him to the inside of the frame. He's not on the outside. There we go. Now let's right click and clone him again as a copy. And I can, at this point, I'm in move, so I can actually just put negative in front of the X distance. Now he's there at that negative 91.55. Him I'm going to select, and I'm going to go into rotate, but here as well, on rotate, I need to switch from view to local, and I'm going to rotate that 180 degrees. Oops. Let's turn on our angle snap. That'll make it easier. Angle snap, as always, is right up here. You can hit A to turn that on. There we go. Rotate that 180. All right. So for what we're going to do for the tent, this is probably a really good place for us to start. All right. So I'm going to come in here now, and I'm going to drop a plane. So I'm just going to click and drag to make a plane out here in the world. All right. Now let's take this, and I'm going to right click and say move, and just lower it up so it's kind of sitting above these pieces. And what I'm going to do is going to rotate. I'm going to rotate him so that he's kind of angled, sitting on top. There we go. Okay, so when you're working with cloth, I'm going to click here to make the perspective view bigger, maximize viewport. All right, when you're working with cloth, let's also, real quick, I'm going to center the x-axis on 0. There we go. When you're working with cloth, you need to have a lot of vertex points in order for the simulation we're going to run to work. All right, so if I take this plane and I change it to 32 by 32, and then I put a cloth modifier on here, I go into object properties, I set the plane to be cloth, and let's make this burlap, and then I'm going to add objects to the scene. Let's just add all of these beams and make those collision objects and say OK. Now if I hit simulate, it's going to run the simulation. You see it's very chunky right now. And the reason that it's chunky is that if I hit F4 to turn off edge faces, the reason it's so chunky right now is the number of polygons, right? If we want this to drop more, we're going to need to get more polygons on it. So let's click on that. And if you're going to change polygon and change any of that info, you need to remove the modifier, all right? So let's crank it up. We're going to make it 64 by 64, and we're actually going to make it wider. All right, we're going to have it a little bit wider and just a little bit longer. So if I come in here and hit edge faces, you can see now it's a more dense mesh. Let's even go, let's put another cloth on there. Go into object properties. Here's our plane. We're set to be cloth. We're set to be burlap. Let's add other objects. Let's add all of our beams. Let's say add. Set them to be collision. Hit OK. And now we'll hit simulate again. So now the simulation's running slower because there's more geometry. There's more geometry. It's intersecting with more pieces. All Right, so there it is. It's kind of coming in here and dropping and falling down into place. So this isn't too bad. We could go through and we could add a lot more polygons, and we could also work on getting additional shapes. We do have one area here where it's intersecting on itself. We kind of don't want that. We can always grab, if we were to collapse it down, we could probably grab those verts and remove them, or grab those verts and manually pull them. Kind of want to avoid doing that. Maybe what we'll do is this instead. I'm going to remove the modifier. Maybe what I want is, I don't want it to be quite as, yeah, I don't want it to come out this way, so I'm going to reduce my length a little bit. There we go. And maybe if I switch my position to local, I'm going to slide it down a little bit. There we go. And then orbit around. And let's, once again, we're going to put a fresh cloth modifier on. Go to Object Properties. Select Plane, Cloth. And let's try a different one. Let's try this as Cotton. And then let's add additional objects. Beams. Oops. Say Add. Set those collision. Say OK. And now let's run our simulation. Different types of cloth are going to behave differently. Right, the burlap is a lot stiffer type of fabric. It is less pliant. It doesn't fold as much. So, all right, so let's take a look at what this looks like. So we orbit around a little bit. This looks pretty good. There's some areas where it's kind of intersecting on itself still, which is not the best. Let's try it one other way. So I'm going to take this cloth. I'm actually going to switch to view. I'm just going to lower it down here so it's right above these areas. And then I'm going to actually select my geometry. And you see now when I click on something, they all have cloth assigned to them. So let's do something a little bit different. I'm going to right click on, or I'm just going to come over here, right click and say collapse to. And that's going to collapse all those. Now it's an editable mesh. I can convert that to an edit poly. I'm just going to attach the other post. I'm going to attach each of those posts. There we go. I'm going to go into element. Let's turn on edge faces so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to select all three of these and I'm going to turn on my slice plane. So let's look here on the side, slice plane. Right? Anywhere I put this, it's going to cut the geometry. So let's maximize the viewport. I'm going to go into rotate here and rotate this up. I kind of want to line it up so it's just about where that cloth is. And I'm going to hit slice. And now I'm going to go into polygon. And I'm going to hold Alt and deselect. Then hit Z and then deselect the bottoms. So now I just got these caps up on the top. I'm going to delete those. Alright, so now let's select our plane. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to look at this from the top. And I'm going to put another cloth on it. Oh, one other thing. I'm going to go to create. I'm going to go to helpers. So the first one's geometry. If you count on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the little triangle. What I need is to make a dummy. I'll click out here, negative space, make a dummy. Right click and then click on my cloth, which I'm actually going to change the color of the cloth to like a yellow so it's easier to see. Alright, now modify, let's put cloth modifier on it. I'm going to go into the sub-object of cloth here and go into group. And right where these vertex points are, I'm going to select these points. And I'm going to hold control. I'm going to go around and keep selecting points. Because what I want to do here is I want to get this so that I turn these into a group. I don't want these points to move. I want everything else to. So I'm going to say make group and just say OK. And then with that group selected here, I'm going to click node and click on the dummy. So now I can take this cloth. So if I go to object properties, I select my cloth and I can make it, let's say burlap again. You know, I'm actually going to go with, let's go with cotton. And add objects, and so I'm going to add the objects. And say collision, say OK. And let's restore our viewports. There we go. And now hit simulate. And so you're going to see everything's going to move except for those vertex points that I had selected. There we go. That looks pretty good. There we go. So let's restore our viewport here, or maximize it, orbit around. It looks pretty good. It looks like we have some geometry that's intersecting on itself. That's no good. Maybe let's erase our simulation. Go to object properties and select the plane. And let's change it. Let's make it burlap. And say OK. And then simulate that and see if we get that same result where we have so many things intersecting. See, the burlap doesn't look as interesting. It's such a stiff cloth. I'm going to hit cancel and hit erase. Go into object properties. Let's try another option. Oh, gotta select the plane. And let's try the terry cloth just to see. We'll try a couple different ones out and see which one looks best. That kind of it's not bad. You kind of watch how it falls. Oof, this is rough on this side though. Let's erase that. Go to object properties, and we'll try one more. Well, let's just give it a shot. Starch cotton, what do you got for me? Well, it's not as interesting as some of the other ones, but it doesn't appear to be intersecting itself as much. So I think we're going to go with this one. We could keep working and experimenting with the other ones to try and make them work, but I think that for the purposes of trying to move this forward, we're going to go with this one. So now I'm going to name this cloth underscore HP and hit enter. I'm going to right click on it and convert it to an edit poly. At this point, I do have one section here where the vertices are kind of inside each other. So what happens if I select that one edge, and if I find my loops, right, I'm in edge mode. If I find loops, my loops are actually floating. You'll find them in your modeling ribbon, loops. If I just do remove loop, I'm going to double click on this edge and say loops, float connect. That's better. They're not intersecting as much. Well, if I grab this one and say ring, I grab one edge, I come over and under selection click ring, and then under edit geometry click collapse. That's better. And I grab this edge and say loops, set flow. There you go. That's a little better. It doesn't look like anything else is really intersecting. It is intersecting the geometry a little bit. So what we can do is we could put our push modifier on. My push is right here. I'm going to take that and just push it out by value of 1. I think it shouldn't be clipping through the geometry of the wood anymore. It is a little bit here. What I could do is right click and say convert to edit poly. And now if I go into vertex mode, or maybe polygon mode, just kind of zoom in here. And I'm going to open up this rollout called soft selection. I'm going to turn on use soft selection. You see how I get this rainbow? what will happen is as I select and I kind of pull this out, you see how it kind of pulls the geometry around it. Let's turn off soft selection now though. Alright, so here's our cloth HP. It's an edit poly. Now let's go ahead and under subdivision surface, we'll click NURMS. We'll use our NURMS subdivision. Now we're going to take this guy and we're going to right click and clone him as a copy, and we'll call him cloth underscore LP. And actually I'm going to hit cancel. Before I do that, with NURMS on, I'm going to go ahead and export him. File, export selected, and I'm going to go to my woodworking folder. I'm going to say tent underscore LP, export that out as an FBX file. Say OK. And now I'm going to clone it as a copy. I'm going to call this cloth underscore LP and say OK. Now I'm just going to right click anywhere and say hide unselected. Cloth LP is what I have selected. I'm going to turn on edged faces. I'm going to turn off NURMS, and I'm just going to come in here and in edge mode, I'm going to select this one edge here on the side, and under modify selection, go to dot ring, which will grab every other ring. Just orbit around, make sure I don't have the ones on the very end. And let's just go to loops and do remove loop. I don't want to do that much. I'm going to go back to a couple undos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start here on the side, modify selection dot ring, but then I'm going to deselect everything up to just here on the insides where I want to start working. I want to stay far away from anywhere where it's intersecting with that main geometry. I just do loops, remove loop, and now here, same thing. I just kind of want to be in the center, modify selection dot ring, and I'm going to hold Alt and deselect because I just want to stay away from where the beams are when I go to start optimizing this. And then loops, remove loop. There we go. If I was to look at my element, click on this guy, he's still 2,000 polygons. What I might do is just kind of come in here and select every other edge manually, and then hit ring, and then under edit geometry hit collapse, kind of optimize that a little bit. Same thing here. I'm going to kind of come in and where it's dipping down, just kind of manually select these edges, go ring, and hit collapse. That's pretty good. Let's click on this. Yeah, he's already down to 15,000. I think that's probably good for this tent. We don't need to optimize it any more than that. It says cloth LP. Let's export that out. File, export selected. And we're going to call it tent. Oops. I named this one the wrong one, my high poly. Let's right click and say rename. And we'll call it tent underscore HP. And now here at the bottom, we can fix the name to tent LP. Export as an FBX file, say save. Okay. Alright, and now we've exported out our tent. At this point, I'm going to save. I'm going to stop the tutorial, and I'm going to do the next part where we take it into Substance Painter in a second